I recognize the gentlewoman from Florida for 5 minutes.
Mr. Goldman, as a member of the Intelligence Committee, I saw significant firsthand evidence that President Trump conditioned our military aid on Ukraine announcing investigations into the 2016 election and the Bidens, and betrayed our national security interests in the process. For example, Ambassador Sondland told us that once the Ukrainians found out about the aid being withheld, it was made, and I quote, abundantly clear to them that if they wanted the aid, and I quote, they were going to have to make these statements. Mr. Goldman, beginning on and around the 25th of July call through September, would you agree that, consistent with the testimony we just reviewed, Ukraine was made aware that to receive our military aid and the White House visit, that they were going to have to make a statement announcing the investigations?
Not only were they made aware, but they were made aware either by President Trump's proxy, Rudy Giuliani, or from President Trump himself through Ambassador Sondland, who spoke to President Zelensky and Andrei Yermak on September 7th and told them what President Trump had confirmed to him, that the aid was conditioned on the investigations. And
by the end of August, President Zelensky did in fact commit to making that statement on CNN. Is that correct?
That's right. Finally, President Zelensky relented after months of trying to not get involved in what he called the domestic U.S. political process, and ultimately recognizing that he had no choice to break the stalemate, as Ambassador Sondland told them, that he ultimately agreed to go on television before before President Trump got caught and released the aid.
I'd like to direct your attention to the screen in front of you, which displays, again, a Washington Post article from September 5th. The headline says, Trump tries to force Ukraine to meddle in the 2020 elections, and the article reports that President Trump is, and I quote, attempting to force Zelensky to intervene in the 2020 U.S. presidential election by launching an investigation of the leading Democratic candidate, Joe Biden. Mr. Trump is not just soliciting Ukraine's help with his presidential campaign. He is using United States military aid the country desperately needs in an attempt to extort it. So am I correct, Mr. Goldman, that by September 25th, allegations that President Trump was using military aid to pressure Ukraine to announce investigation was being widely reported?
I'm sorry, by what date?
September 5th.
Yes, well, widely reported. Certainly the aid being withheld was widely reported.
And by September 9th, our investigative committees formally announced a congressional investigation into the president of these issues, to the president about these issues. And Mr. Goldman, what day did President Trump release the military aid?
2 days after the investigations were announced, and 2 days after the IG, the Inspector General, told the Intelligence Committee that there was a complaint that was being withheld.
So then am I correct that, as the timeline on the screen in front of you shows, it wasn't until after the whistleblower complaint, after the Washington Post report, and after Congress launched the investigations that President Trump finally released the aid?
That's right, and I would just add one thing briefly to the Congressman's point, that it is true that President Trump has given more military assistance than President Obama. And so one would wonder, if he does support military assistance so much, why then is he holding it up for more than 2 months?
And matter of fact, Lieutenant Colonel Vindman testified that people at the NSC, in fact, discussed that Congress's investigation, quote, might have the effect of releasing the hold on Ukraine's military aid because it would be potentially politically challenging to justify the aid. Is that correct, Mr. Goldman?
That was the testimony, yes.
In other words, the aid was released after the president got caught. And what makes me angry is that this president, President Trump, thinks he can get away with it. But he got caught, and he tried to cover it up. But we won't let him do that. And we thank God, Mr. Goldman, for the true, courageous public servants who came forward in spite of intimidation and obstruction from the White House. You see, everybody counts, but everybody is accountable. up to and including the President of the United States. Thank you, and I yield back.
Thank you. The chair